Her husband beat her and said that no one would believe her, but her neighbor recorded everything. And what happened next shook half the country a few weeks earlier. A quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles, rows of trees, the song of a distant bird, a dog barks. A woman waters the plants on her balcony while chatting with her neighbor across the street. A gas truck passes by, honking its horn. Everything seems ordinary, normal. But on the third floor of a gray building, behind a window closed with thick curtains, there is a story that no one dares to see. Inside, Valeria is making coffee. Her apartment is clean, everything perfectly arranged, nothing out of place. She also seems to be fine. Her clothes are discreet, her hair is pulled back, her eyes are calm. But when she approaches the stove, you can see the tremor in her hands, the way she startles at every sound, the way she pauses before answering her cell phone, looking down the hallway as if asking for permission. And then you hear the door. Ivan enters without warning. He throws the bag down, not looking at her. "You're at it again with your little faces," he says emotionlessly. "Or you're going to pretend that everything is fine." Valeria doesn't answer. She lowers her head and walks toward him to receive a bag from the supermarket. He pushes her slightly with his shoulder without saying another word. The narrator's voice enters for the first time, like a whisper that breaks the air. Everyone thought she lived peacefully, that she was happy. No one imagined what was happening behind closed doors. No one, except someone who lived right next door. Cut. Only a few inches separate that hell from another apartment. Lucia, a young nurse, takes off her headphones. She was listening to music, but something made her stop. She turns toward the wall and remains silent. She hears the blow. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't accidental. She gets up slowly, approaches the wall, and hears Ivan's voice. It's low, almost imperceptible. "Do whatever you want. You can scream all you want. No one will believe you. They never do." Lucia closes her eyes. She swallows, and the memories come flooding back. She has heard that voice before. Not that particular one, but those same words that were once said to her. And at that moment, without knowing it, something is triggered. A spark. A decision. Because even though Valeria thinks she is alone, she is no longer alone. The building said nothing. It was like any other in the Boyle Heights neighborhood. 3 stories, pale gray, windows with closed curtains, clothes hanging on the roof. From the outside, everything seemed in order. No one looked twice. No one asked any questions. But on the 3rd floor, apartment 302, lived Valeria, 32, a Spanish teacher at a public high school. Always well-groomed, always dressed in neutral tones, always punctual. To her neighbors, she was friendly, reserved, the kind of person who didn't get involved with anyone. She smiled when they greeted her, nodded silently. She had no friends who visited her, only Ivan. He was also discreet. He worked as a freelance graphic designer, they said. He was almost always at home. He didn't talk to anyone in the building, but he was polite. There was never a shout, never a scandal. He was the kind of man who, at first glance, gave no reason to be suspicious, but it was enough to look closely, to look beyond appearances, to notice the details. Every morning, Valeria left with the same expression on her face, still, tense, with a forced smile as if she had rehearsed it in front of the mirror. She wore long sleeves even in the middle of summer. Sometimes she had bruises on her arms or neck, small hidden ones. Other times she was seen walking more slowly, as if something hurt when she moved. She never said anything, never explained. When she came home, she always looked down, never raised her voice. And when Ivan spoke, she lowered her head. No one said anything, no one noticed. Or maybe they didn't want to notice until Lucia arrived. Lucia had moved into 301 just a few weeks earlier. She was a nurse on the afternoon shift at a medical center, 26 years old, with short hair and a direct gaze. She had moved alone after leaving a relationship where she had also learned to keep quiet, but she was no longer the same. She learned to observe, to detect the signs, and something about Valeria seemed familiar to her. The first time they crossed paths in the hallway, Valeria smiled, but it was a strange, tense, forced smile, as if she were afraid of appearing rude. Lucia noticed it. She also noticed that she avoided eye contact, that her answers were short, and that when the conversation ended, she hurried to close the door behind her. Lucia began to pay attention. One day she noticed that Valeria was leaving without her cell phone. Another day, she saw Ivan checking her backpack before she left. On several occasions, she heard heavy footsteps inside 302. Sometimes furniture being dragged, abrupt silences, as if everything were being turned off on purpose. One night, as she was getting ready to leave for work, she heard a thud, then hurried footsteps, and then nothing, just the sound of the television turned on. Lucia stood still. She felt the skin on her arms bristle. She remembered the time she herself walked around her house afraid of making noise. She remembered the control, the fear, the routine of silence, and she understood. What was happening in there was not normal. It was not love. It was something else. Something she already knew too well. What Valeria didn't know was that this time, there was someone listening on the other side of the wall. Someone who wasn't going to stay silent. The alarm clock always went off at 6 o'clock. That sharp, piercing beep that bounced off the walls like a warning. Not just a simple reminder to wake up. Valeria opened her eyes at the first sound. She never hit snooze, never complained. She got up quietly, as if every movement had to go unnoticed. Ivan was still asleep, face down, snoring softly, frowning even in his dreams. Valeria walked barefoot to the kitchen, stepping only where she knew the floor wouldn't creak. She did everything with precision, out of habit. The coffee, the dishes, the dim lights, as if her life were a meticulously choreographed dance that could not fail. While the water boiled, she took the lunch she had prepared the night before out of the refrigerator. 2 sandwiches, one for her, one for him, Ivan's with ham, no mayonnaise. If she made a mistake, she knew it. It had happened before. Outside, she could already hear the first cars passing by, the horns of the city, just waking up. But inside, the silence was something else. It wasn't peace, it was contained tension. In the bathroom, she looked in the mirror only as much as necessary. She put on her makeup quickly, just enough. She covered a barely visible shadow on her neck near her collarbone with foundation. It wasn't recent, but it hadn't completely gone away. That day she chose a long-sleeved blouse. Despite the heat, she always found a reason to cover up. When she came out of the bathroom, Ivan was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, checking his cell phone. "You took a long time," he said, without looking up. Valeria replied with an almost inaudible, "Almost." She left her lunch on the table, prepared her thermos, and put away her notebook. Everything in silence, everything carefully. Before leaving, she approached him to kiss him on the cheek. It was part of the protocol. If she didn't do it, he would ask. If she did it wrong, he would notice. "What time will you be back?" he asked, his tone now different. "Around 4, she said, without looking him in the eye. "Send me your location when you arrive," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order disguised as a habit. She nodded and walked toward the door. With her hand already on the doorknob, she heard him say, "And don't be late. Yesterday you were already half an hour late. I don't like you loafing around." She didn't answer, just lowered her head and left. In the hallway of the building, her face changed. That tension hid behind a friendly smile for the neighbor who was sweeping the entrance. She walked upright, greeting people politely. Anyone who saw her would think she was a normal woman, just one of many. But inside, Valeria was fighting a constant war, a battle of unspoken words, unseen wounds, a silent fear she carried like an invisible backpack. Her cell phone always monitored, her social media empty, no friends, family distant. Her world was small, controlled, closed, and the silence, that heavy silence that surrounded everything she did, was her way of surviving. The scariest thing was that she had already normalized it. She no longer wondered if it was right. She no longer complained. She just obeyed. From the window of apartment 301, Lucia saw her leave. She was leaning back, drinking her coffee. She didn't say anything, but she saw her. And although Valeria didn't know it, for the first time in a long time, someone was really seeing her. It all started with a slight noise. One early morning, when Lucia could barely sleep after another endless shift at the hospital. At first she thought it was a chair being dragged, then that maybe someone had dropped something. But no. That sound had a different tone. It wasn't an accident. It was restraint. A kind of muffled struggle, as if someone were fighting not to make a sound. As if they were trying to hide something behind a thin wall. From that night on, Lucia began to listen more carefully, and the more she listened, the more she understood. It wasn't just isolated banging. It was interrupted arguments, low screams, words muttered under their breath. Are you stupid or what? Who are you going to tell? No one, Valeria. Don't be an idiot. Valeria, for her part, no longer made eye contact with anyone. Before, she would at least greet people with a slight smile. Now she looked like a shadow. Lucia saw her go down the stairs every day, head down, taking short steps, shoulders hunched, as if she were carrying an invisible but very heavy backpack, as if the house were not a home, but a minefield. One afternoon, while watering her plants, Lucia decided to say something to Don Armando, the doorman, a kind older man, one of those who always has a radio playing bolero music. Hey, Don Armando, have you noticed anything strange in the apartment next door? She asked carefully. The man adjusted his cap without looking at her. Strange? Well, I don't know. Noises, arguments, banging. He let out a dry chuckle. No, they're quiet, discreet, serious people. He always says hello to me. She doesn't even speak. They've never given me any trouble. Lucia frowned. Sometimes the one who doesn't cause trouble is the problem. Don Armando shrugged. Look, my dear, everyone knows what goes on in their own home, right? Besides, if it were something serious, someone would have said something by now. That phrase stuck in her chest. If it were something serious, someone would have said something by now. And that was the damn problem. No one said anything. No one listened. No one wanted to see. From that day on, Lucia began to make a mental note of everything. The times she heard doors slamming. The times Valeria came downstairs wearing dark glasses. Even at night, the times her voice trembled when she asked for something at the store. The times she disappeared for days, and then came back, thinner, quieter. Everything spoke to her. Everything screamed at her that something was very wrong, but it was as if the entire building had decided to close its eyes. Lucia wasn't a police officer. She wasn't an investigator. But she knew what it was like to feel fear inside your own home. She knew what it was like to feel that no one would believe you. And now what distressed her most wasn't the screams. It was the silence that came after. That thick silence that always appears when it's too late. It was Thursday, almost 9 p.m. The sky over the Boyle Heights neighborhood was heavy, as if the entire city were holding its breath. Valeria was preparing dinner, a chicken stew with rice that no longer smelled of anything. Everything was measured, calculated. The heat was low. The pan was right in the center. No extra salt, no extra oil. Nothing that could provoke a bad comment. Nothing that could light the fuse. Because she knew that Ivan was in a bad mood. Since early in the day, he had been sending her curt messages. I'm fed up. Why did you get married? If you're useless, make dinner. Valeria didn't respond to any of them. She just left her cell phone on the table with the screen facing down. It was 8:53 when she heard the keys jangling in the door, and she knew that sound, the metal entering the lock in a hurry, was the silent alarm of every storm. The door burst open. Ivan came in with a plastic bag in his hand. Beer again? No. You were going to make something special. He spat as soon as he saw her. I'm making chicken and rice, she said quietly, turning slightly, without looking at him directly. Chicken and rice. Again. That's what's special to you. I'm sick and tired of eating the same thing. He dropped the bag on the table. The bottles clinked loudly. Valeria took a deep breath. If you don't like it, I can make something else. Now you get to decide, he said, taking a step toward her. His tone was no longer controlled. It was no longer disguised sarcasm. It was rage. She raised her hands in a slight gesture, not of defense, but of surrender. I just want you to have a peaceful dinner, Ivan. And that was when he pushed her. A single movement with his palm straight to her shoulder. She fell sideways against the wall. The pan screeched as it moved on its own. The rice spilled onto the stove, and then came the blow. It wasn't with a clenched fist. It was a sharp, violent slap. The sound of flesh against flesh echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. On the other side of the wall, Lucia was folding clothes while watching a video on her cell phone. When she heard the first scream, she froze. But that blow pierced her. She dropped everything, the t-shirts, the phone, her breath. She walked slowly toward the wall she shared with 302. She pressed her ear against it and listened. It's always the same with you, Valeria. You can't do anything right, nothing. Valeria was sobbing below, not asking for help, not begging, just breaking down. Silently, Lucia closed her eyes. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew what was coming next, and for the first time, she didn't hesitate. She went back for her cell phone, unlocked it with trembling fingers, opened the camera, didn't point it at anything, just tapped record. The sound began to be recorded in seconds. In the background, she could hear Ivan walking with heavy steps, throwing something, opening doors, and then that phrase, the one that can never be erased. Scream if you want, no one will believe you. No one has ever believed you and no one ever will. Lucia pressed her lips together, stood alone in her living room with her cell phone recording, her eyes glassy, her heart racing, but firm, determined. She knew that this was no longer just a moment. It was the breaking point, the instant when everything, absolutely everything, changes forever. Lucia was trembling. Her hands could barely hold the cell phone. Her pulse was vibrating so much that the screen moved in small jumps, as if it were also afraid. The video continued to record without a clear image, only the dark shot of her living room with the dim light on and the shadows oscillating from the street. But the audio was clear, brutal, raw. On the other side of the wall, Valeria sobbed, crying with that kind of restrained cry that cannot be learned, that cannot be faked. A cry that does not seek help, that does not expect comfort. A resigned, broken cry. Please, Ivan, now please no more. Her voice was almost a whisper, as if she knew that any louder words would make everything worse. Ivan, on the other hand, responded with a calmness that was more frightening than the screams. Ah, you don't like it anymore. Now you can't take it anymore. Footsteps were heard, the creaking of a door, something being dragged. Do whatever you want, Valeria. Cry, scream, kick. No one will hear you. If you hear me, be silent. And then, in a firm, measured voice, Ivan delivered the sentence like a knife straight to the heart. You can scream all you want. No one will believe you. If you heard these words, what would you do at that moment? Search or door? Leave a comment. Lucia closed her eyes. Her chest tightened. Rage, helplessness, fear, everything rose through her body like fire. And behind that, the memories. Memories of another voice, another room, another man who said the same thing to her years ago. You can scream if you want, Lucia. No one is going to come for you. She remembered how she swallowed those words, how she kept them inside for months, how she convinced herself that maybe it was true. But now she was hearing those same words spoken with the same venom, only directed at another woman. Lucia swallowed, took a deep breath, and looked back at her cell phone screen. The counter read 2 minutes and 27 seconds. The video was still recording, and at that moment she made her decision without hesitation, without thinking about the consequences. In a low voice, as if she needed to hear herself to believe it, she murmured, "I believe you. I do." She pressed herself back against the wall, her forehead resting on the old rough paint. She listened to Valeria's trembling, her broken words, the footsteps of the man who continued to humiliate her, and she repeated, "I will believe for both of us." Because she understood that perhaps she had not just been a witness to something. Perhaps she was there for a reason. Maybe life had put her in that apartment on that very night to break the cycle that was almost killing her. Lucia didn't know what was going to happen, but she no longer had a choice. The silence was over. Lucia didn't move. She stood next to the wall, clutching her cell phone to her chest, as if holding it that way could protect Valeria. The tears wouldn't come, but her eyes were red, crystal clear, heavy. Inside, she was a whirlwind. She didn't know if what she was feeling was fear, anger, or something older and more buried. It was as if all the wounds she once thought were closed had opened again. On the other side of the wall, Valeria was no longer crying. Only her ragged breathing could be heard, a mixture of gasps and silence. And in between, the sound of Ivan walking around the apartment, talking to himself, cursing random things. Lucia looked at the screen. Almost 3 minutes of recording. The audio was complete. There was no doubt. It wasn't a suspicion. It was evidence. She wiped her sweaty hands on her pajama pants. She unlocked her phone, dialed 06, one tone, then another, then a female voice on the other end of the line. Emergencies. What is your situation? Lucia swallowed hard. Good evening, she said softly, choosing her words carefully. My name is Lucia Mendoza. I live in the Boyle Heights neighborhood in building number 15, apartment 301. My neighbor is being assaulted. Right now, silence. The woman on the phone seemed hesitant. Are you sure? Can you confirm if there is immediate danger? She heard screams. Yes, Lucia replied more firmly. It's happening. I have a recording now. A recording? Yes. Everything that man said is on the audio. Listen to it yourself. The operator hesitated for another second. Can you send it by text? Lucia did so, selecting the file and sending it to the contact number the assistant gave her. Less than 20 seconds passed. The operator returned. We've got it. We're sending a patrol car immediately. Can you stay safe and available? Lucia hung up. She couldn't stay there. She couldn't keep listening without doing something else, but she couldn't intervene either. Not yet. She opened the camera again. She tapped record. This time, without trembling. She didn't point the phone at the wall. She left it on the table, capturing the atmosphere. Ivan's voice continued, although lower, as if he were tired, or perhaps simply bored. What? You're not going to say anything anymore, he said, almost mockingly. Of course, you don't even have a voice anymore, right? Lucia sat on the edge of the armchair. Her arms were crossed. Her heart was beating in her neck. Every sound seemed amplified, as if the whole world were contained in that apartment, within those walls. And there, in that almost dark room, with the light from the hallway barely filtering under the door, Lucia took a deep breath, once, twice, 3 times. She realized that she wasn't just doing something for Valeria. She was ultimately healing something that no one had helped her heal. Finally, after so long, she stopped feeling like a victim and became a witness, an ally, a voice. Because sometimes you just need one person to say, I believe you, I'm here. And now that person was her. The sirens could be heard 3 blocks away. At first it was a distant echo, barely a murmur amid the normal noise of the city. But Lucia knew instantly. It was for them, for Valeria. She stood up as if driven by something stronger than herself. She looked at her cell phone screen. The recording was still playing. Her hand was no longer shaking. It was no longer fear. It was pure determination. The red and blue lights reflected off the windows of the building. Don Armando, the doorman, came out of his booth in surprise, broom in hand. Some neighbors opened their curtains. Others poked their heads out from their balconies. The patrol car stopped right in front of number 15. 2 officers got out without wasting any time. One of them, tall with a serious face, rang the doorbell of 302 loudly. Ding dong, ding dong. A pause. Back inside the apartment, Ivan moved quickly. He opened the bathroom door where Valeria was sitting on the floor with her back against the bathtub. Her face was swollen, a trickle of dried blood at the corner of her lip. The tears had stopped flowing. She was just breathing as if it were difficult to be there, as if she wanted to disappear. Stand up, Ivan ordered her in a low but angry voice. They're coming. Behave yourself. Valeria barely managed to stand up. She walked slowly toward the living room, her eyes fixed on the floor. Knock, knock, knock. Louder now. Ivan took a deep breath, ran his hand through his hair, forced a smile, and opened the door. Good evening, officers, he said in a friendly voice. Is there a problem? The taller policeman stared at him. We received a report of domestic violence at this address. Ivan laughed softly, feigning surprise. Not here. Not at all. There must be a mistake. Everything is fine here. The second officer looked inside the apartment. Valeria was in the corner with her arms crossed, staring at the floor. She wasn't even trying to pretend. She was just existing. The first officer frowned. Are you Valeria Gomez? He asked, addressing her. Ivan took a step forward. She's fine. She's tired. She worked all day. She was taking a shower. But the officer didn't speak to him. He took another step and repeated, "Ms. Valeria Gomez, can we talk to you?" Valeria looked up and nodded slightly without saying a word. Ivan took a deep breath. Inside, he was boiling, but on the outside, he maintained that fake smile, that calm facade. And then, firm, determined footsteps were heard in the hallway. Lucia appeared at the door, still in her pajamas, her hair half tied back, cell phone in hand. "Excuse me, I'm the neighbor from 301. I was the one who called." Ivan turned his head, his face changing instantly. His eyes widened. His jaw dropped slightly. Lucia held her cell phone with the recording already open on the screen. "I have proof. I recorded everything. You can hear the blows, the threats, everything." The second officer motioned to her. Lucia held the cell phone closer. The audio began to play. Ivan's voice echoed in the apartment hallway. "Scream if you want. No one will believe you. You're useless. You do everything wrong." The officers looked at each other. Ivan's smile disappeared. "Not that. That's out of context," he tried to say, no longer with the same confidence. Valeria remained silent, but at that moment, for the first time in a long time, she looked at him and didn't look away. She didn't say anything. It wasn't necessary because now someone else had spoken for her. Lucia kept her gaze fixed on the police officers. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't backing down. It was as if her whole body was screaming without a single word. "I'm with her." Valeria remained standing in the corner of the room. She hadn't moved since the police entered. Her arms were crossed like a shield that no longer protected anything. But something changed in her face. Slowly, very slowly, she raised her head, and for the first time all night looked directly at Lucia. Her eyes were red, glassy, swollen, but there was no fear in them. There was surprise, and something that Lucia recognized immediately: relief. Lucia, standing next to the officers, returned her gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just stood there firmly, as if saying with her eyes, "You're not alone." Ivan, still standing in the middle of the room, took a step toward the officer. "It's not what it looks like. You don't understand how things are between us. That recording is edited. It's out of context. She always exaggerates. She's very emotional." "Are you saying it's not your voice?" interrupted the officer. Ivan remained silent. He hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. "Yes, it's my voice. But do you also deny that you pushed your wife?" "It wasn't a push. She crossed my path. I was only trying to pass. She provoked me." At that moment, the mask fell, the feigned calm, the soft voice. Everything broke, and what remained in front of them was an uncontrolled, nervous man, desperately seeking to regain the control he had just lost. The second officer approached. "Mr. Ivan Torres, please put your hands behind your back." "No, you can't do this. She hasn't said anything." "Valeria, tell them nothing happened." But Valeria didn't look at him. She kept looking at Lucia, and her lips moved slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Thank you." Lucia looked down slightly, swallowed, didn't know what to say, just pressed her cell phone to her chest. Ivan was handcuffed without resistance. At that moment, he turned pale. The color drained from his face, his eyes wide open, looking for a way out that no longer existed. "This isn't going to end like this," he muttered, as the officers led him out the door. "This isn't over." The door closed behind him. Valeria fell to her knees on the floor. She didn't cry loudly. She just let the tears fall silently. But for the first time, without guilt, without hiding, Lucia slowly approached with moist eyes. She said nothing, just sat down next to her, and in that silence there was finally peace. The shelter was on a quiet street in Pasadena, a few blocks from the hustle and bustle, hidden among old houses and trees that filtered the light, as if they wanted to protect what was happening inside. It was a two-story building, with warm-colored walls and large windows, but with sturdy bars. It was a place that didn't look like an institution, but rather a house with history, a tired but sturdy house. Valeria arrived accompanied by a social worker who said almost nothing during the trip. It wasn't necessary. Valeria didn't speak. She hadn't opened her mouth since the police took her away, not even when she signed the papers at the police station. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded with that same automatic gesture she had perfected over the years. Upon entering the center, she smelled a faint scent of coffee, disinfectant, and old wood. There was noise, but it was soft. The voices of women talking in another room, the murmur of a television playing quietly. A volunteer greeted her with a genuine smile. She offered her a blanket, even though it wasn't cold. Valeria accepted it as one accepts borrowed armor. They put her in a room shared with another woman who was asleep at the time. They gave her clean clothes, toiletries, a cup of tea. Valeria sat on the bed with the blanket over her legs and stared at the wall without saying a word. 3 days passed like this. She didn't speak, ate only the bare minimum, and didn't sleep well. She walked slowly down the hallways, her eyes downcast, as if it were difficult for her to exist, as if she didn't know what to do now that the danger had disappeared, as if her body was still waiting for the next blow, the next scream. The visible scars began to heal. The swelling on her cheekbone went down, her lip closed. But the others, the ones you couldn't see, were still there, throbbing inside. On the 4th day, the psychologist called her for the first time. Her name was Laura. She was young, with a soft, firm voice and a non-judgmental way of looking at people. She had a notebook that she didn't use. She just waited. Valeria sat across from her with her arms crossed, her legs crossed. Everything. Her body was a barrier. "You don't have to say anything," Laura said. "Just stay. Silence altus speaks." 20 minutes passed without a single word. The second session was the same. In the third, Valeria said her first, "I don't know." In the fourth, she uttered just one sentence. "My mom was like that too." Laura didn't ask any questions. She just waited, and the shy words began to come out like drops. "She was silent, always silent," Valeria said with a distant look in her eyes. "My dad would come home drunk, throw things, hit the table, sometimes her, sometimes me. She would close her eyes, and the next day she would serve breakfast as if nothing had happened." A deep silence filled the room. I swore I would never live through that. She opened her moist eyes. I swore that if anyone ever raised a hand to me, I would leave, but it didn't happen that way. Laura took a deep breath. "What stopped you the most?" Valeria hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because it hurt to say it out loud. "He was right," she whispered. "I thought no one would believe me, and that broken sentence, laden with shame and truth, hung between them." Laura didn't try to correct her, didn't interrupt her, just listened to her, because that was the first time Valeria had said it out loud. And with that, she began to break the cycle. In the afternoon, Lucia sent a note with a volunteer. It wasn't long. It just said, "I'm here. You don't have to talk. I just wanted you to know that I believe you, and that I'm proud of you." Valeria read it once, then again, and then she smiled without meaning to. Small, fragile, but real, because the storm had passed, and for the first time she felt that maybe there was a life beyond all that. The first day Valeria looked in the mirror without feeling disgust was the day she allowed herself to cry without fear. Almost 3 weeks had passed since her arrival at the shelter. 3 weeks of silence, pauses, small steps forward and backward. But that morning, something changed. It wasn't a spectacular event. No one said anything extraordinary. She just got up, walked to the shared bathroom with her towel over her shoulder, and saw her reflection, without makeup, without combing her hair, without hiding, and for the first time, she didn't feel guilty about being there. After showering, she returned to her room and found something that surprised her. A white envelope with no name on it was on her bed. Inside was a folded sheet of paper with handwriting on it. "Today, I thought about you, about how brave you were that night, about how strong you are now. You may not feel it, but from here, you can see it. I don't know you very well, Valeria, but I don't need to in order to admire you. Lucia." Her fingers trembled a little as she held the sheet of paper. She sat on the bed, read the note 3 times, and then allowed herself to feel that someone on the other side of that story was still there, not because they had to be, but because they wanted to be. From that day on, Lucia wrote to her often, little notes, short messages that arrived with the volunteers, like little pieces of sunshine in the middle of winter. "Today, I cooked rice, and it turned out awful. I miss you in the kitchen. I passed by your building. It's quieter than ever. The doorman asked about you. I'm reading a book about women who are reborn. It reminded me of you." Valeria began to respond first with one line, then two. One of those replies said, "Thank you for not letting go of me." In the afternoons, when she didn't have sessions, she would sit near the large window in the common room. From there, she could see the center's garden. It was small, but it had bougainvilleas, a wooden bench, and a table where sometimes the other women would paint, sew, or just sit and look at the sky. One day she approached, stood there for a few seconds, and then asked quietly, "Do you have watercolors?" The volunteer smiled at her. "We have everything. Come on in." And so, without seeking it, she returned to what she had forgotten. Painting before Ivan, before the beatings, the hurtful words, and the control disguised as love. Valeria loved to paint. Soft colors, peaceful landscapes, portraits in warm tones. It was her way of speaking when words were not enough. But Ivan told her one day that it was a waste of time, and she, as so many times before, obeyed. Now, in front of a white canvas, with brushes in her hand, something was rekindled. At first they were clumsy strokes, shapeless lines, but there was something there, something alive. And as she mixed colors, she found herself breathing differently, deeper, freer. Over the next few days, she painted more and more faces, windows, intertwined hands, and a painting she called Noise Behind the Wall, in dark tones with a small flash of light in the center. One Saturday morning during the group session, one of the psychologists suggested that they share something they wanted to do in the future. Valeria hesitated, thinking about keeping her answer to herself, but something inside her wouldn't let her stay silent. She raised her hand. Her voice came out low but firm. "I want to live. I want to do things without permission. I want to be heard. And not just because I was beaten, but because I have something to say." The group fell silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was one of those heavy, beautiful silences that only happen when a truth is spoken aloud and no one dares to interrupt. After that, someone clapped, and then another, and another. Valeria looked down, but she smiled, and in that smile there was no longer fear, there was life. It took Lucia several days to make the decision. She had the video saved in a secure folder on her cell phone with a backup in the cloud, on a USB drive, and in an email with a password that only she knew. It wasn't fear, it was respect and responsibility. It wasn't just about uploading it for the sake of uploading it. That audio wasn't hers. It belonged to a story that had barely survived and was still healing. But one night, after talking to Valeria on the phone, a brief, slow call in which she barely said, "I'm better," Lucia understood that there were other Valerias out there, maybe in the apartment next door, maybe at your friend's house, maybe in yourself. And then, without thinking twice, she turned on her laptop, opened the file, edited the video, didn't show any faces, didn't mention any names, just included the recording with a black background. She added simple white text, which appeared slowly between sentences. This happened recently in a quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles. She didn't ask for help. She thought no one would listen to her, but someone heard her from the other side of the wall. Then the raw, unedited audio, Ivan's voice, the threats, the blow, and that final phrase, "Scream if you want, no one will believe you." At the end of the video, a simple caption appeared. There was no dramatic music, no filter, just a direct phrase in white. "She survived. Others can too." Lucia hesitated for a moment before posting. Her heart felt tight, but she did it. She uploaded it to her account, where she had only a few hundred followers. She shared it with the hashtag, "If you hear, do something." She closed her laptop and went to sleep. What happened next was like an avalanche. In a matter of hours, the video was shared by thousands of people, feminist collectives, independent journalists, activists, even anonymous profiles that simply wrote, "This happened to me. I experienced it too, and no one believed me. Thank you for sharing what no one wants to hear." By dawn, it had more than 150,000 views. By noon, it was 500,000. By nightfall, it had surpassed 1 million. Lucia didn't understand how, but she wasn't surprised because she knew it wasn't an isolated case. It was a mirror, and that mirror had shattered into 1,000 pieces in front of the screens of thousands of women who finally felt seen. The comments kept coming. Reports, confessions, stories that were coming to light for the first time. One woman wrote, "I was about to kill myself. This video stopped me. Thank you." Another said, "My daughter saw this, hugged me, and asked me to leave." Valeria didn't have active social media accounts. She wasn't interested in them, but one of the psychologists at the center approached her with a tablet in her hands. "I want to show you something," she said softly. She explained what it was about, that Lucia had made the audio public, that there were no images of her, that it was anonymous, but that it was helping a lot of people. Valeria hesitated, took the tablet with trembling hands, held it as if it weighed twice as much, put on the headphones, and pressed play. She listened to her own hell as if it were another woman, as if it no longer belonged to her, but it was. It was her. That voice, that trembling breath, that fear was hers. And yet for the first time, hearing it so raw, she felt compassion, not shame, not guilt, compassion. The tears flowed freely, without sobs, without lamentations, silent as when it all began. But now they were different. Now they hurt differently. Now they healed. When the video ended, the psychologist handed her a tissue. Valeria accepted it and remained silent for a long time until she said, "I didn't know my voice could help." The psychologist smiled at her. Sometimes, to save others, we just have to dare to tell what no one else wants to tell. Valeria looked at the screen one last time, and when she saw the final sentence, she felt that she was no longer just a victim. She survived. Others can too. And inside her, something rose up, something strong, something new. 6 months had passed. The air in Los Angeles was still the same, dense, full of noise, hurried, full of stories that crossed paths without touching. But inside Valeria, everything had changed. She lived somewhere else now. A small apartment in the Echo Park, Los Angeles district, with windows overlooking a park. She worked part-time as an editorial proofreader from home and took painting classes on the weekends. She had gone back to making her own coffee with her own mug in her own kitchen. Everything in its place, every decision hers. She had an active protection measure. Yvonne couldn't come within 500 meters of her, but the system knew it well. It didn't always work as it should, and that day, the system failed. Valeria was leaving a cafe near the Vermont. It was early. The streets were still filling up with students and office workers in a hurry. She walked calmly, with her bag over her shoulder and a folder of notes under her arm. And there he was, Ivan, leaning against a wall as if he had been waiting for her. The same crooked smile, the same relaxed gesture, the same look as always. That mixture of superiority and false tenderness, as if he could trap her again just by saying, "Hello, Valjo," using that nickname that now sounded like poison to her. "Can we talk for a minute?" She stopped, but didn't back away. She didn't look at the ground. She didn't cross her arms. She just looked at him, steadily, directly, and something in that gaze disarmed him. Ivan tried to soften his voice. "I know I made mistakes. Many. But I'm not the monster you made me out to be out there." She took a step toward him, not to get closer, but so that he would hear her clearly, so that he couldn't pretend he didn't understand. "You don't rule me anymore," she said, without trembling, without rushing. "And now everyone knows who you are." Yvonne tried to smile, but something broke in his face. "So what?" he said, his voice now lower, more tense. "People forget, Valeria. You'll see. They forget everything. They always do." "Maybe," she replied. "But I haven't forgotten myself, and that's all I need." Across the street, a car was waiting for her with the engine running. Lucia was at the wheel. When she saw her, she rolled down the window and smiled. Valeria looked at Ivan one last time, not with hatred, but with certainty, with distance, and turned away. She left him there on the sidewalk, in that same place where before, in another life, she might have remained silent. She walked to the car, got in, and closed the door gently. "Everything okay?" Lucia asked without needing an explanation. Valeria nodded. "Everything's fine." The car started. They drove away, crossing avenues and streets that no longer felt dangerous. The city lights began to come on one by one, and then the final narration, firm as a truth that no one can deny. No wall is too thin when someone is willing to listen. Sometimes all it takes is one person to say, "I believe you," and that was Lucia, and that was Valeria, and that could be anyone. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to explore more content on our channel. We have many more exciting and thought-provoking stories that, like this one, seek to inspire you and show you that there is always hope. Click on the video below and join us for another story that is sure to captivate you from the very beginning. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments, and share this video with those you think might need it. Thank you for being part of this community. See you next time.